Usually I'm a linguist. Occasionally I'm a Jewish studies scholar. Today most of the talk will be more about Judaism or religious aspect in broad, but I will touch upon a linguistic question of an interpretation of an ancient text, which I think, as always, the language can actually teach us and reveal hidden motifs that sometimes we're missing when we're just not paying attention to the details of the language. As we were preparing to our journey 3 years ago, we got acquainted with Shinto. And it was in this context that we have learned the traditional stories about the kamis in general and Amaterasu in particular. One specific part of the story about her struck me the most. The way she was tricked to get out of the cave. The action, which according to the legend, allowed the world to be re-bathed in her radiant sunlight. According to the myth, as Amaterasu was triggered by Amenuzume's dance, and the gods' uproarious laughter, Amaterasu got excited and curious. Subsequently, she opened the block cave just enough to see what was happening. She then was tricked by a mirror, and you can see it here in the picture, the mirror, as she saw her stunning reflection in it. This last part of the story amazed me. I found the idea of revelation and saving the world and re-energizing it via mirror inspiring. And in many ways, this part of the story framed my experience of our special journey to Japan. This journey, on the one hand, brought me to completely new and different culture and religion, of which I knew very little beforehand. On the other hand, observing this tradition seemed very often as looking in the mirror, and it led to new reflections about my own Jewish heritage. It made me think more broadly about the fact that looking at another tradition while observing its richness and at the same time identifying the similarities it has to the observer's tradition has a potential of saving the world even into a time of darkness. This comfort stems simply due to the fact that we may all be more similar than what we think at first. In the following description, I will try to detail the various experiences that shape this sense of looking at the mirror. Looking at the mirror, however, is first and foremost a self-observation. It leads to identifying facts about oneself that were not observed before. Thus, I wish to emphasize that when looking in the mirror, I do not see Shintoism and think that this is Judaism, but it evokes thinking about aspects of Judaism that for obvious and non-obvious reasons do not stand at the core of contemporary Judaism. Finally, I must emphasize that there are many Judaisms. We're speaking about traditions that evolved and revolved during 3 millenniums and in different places and times. Thus, for reasons that I will not detail explicitly, for the most part, the focus today in some aspect will be of the biblical traditions, but I will touch upon other traditions as well. As we began with Amaterasu, I should probably mention the first the feeling I had as we were walking inside Ise Grand, Ise Jinju, which is dedicated to her. The structure of the shrine is almost identical to the one of the biblical tabernacle. So this is, you see on the right hand in the corner, the Ise Grand shrine, and on the structure of the biblical tabernacle, but this is reconstruction according to what is described in the Bible. And the fact that they are basically, if you see, the comparison is the fact that you have a wall which regulate the borders, and then you enter the room which only purified people can enter, But then you have the structure itself that only priests can go inside. And inside it, there is another element that only the high priest can do. And for me at least, while I was walking there, on the one hand, I encountered a Shinto shrine, but on the other hand, it revived a memory that I had, not visual, but in a memory that is somehow embedded in everyone who read the Bible. And as kids, we used to build this structure. This was a game that we did in 4th grade. This is a game I do with my kids. And then I go there and it's alive. This feeling was even stronger later in our journey at the Siwa Shrine, when we were watching the procession. It is hard not to think of the biblical passage in which describes the way the Ark of the Covenant was carried by the priest in the desert. Moreover, when seeing the happiness while carrying the Mikoshi, this is a Mikoshi, I could almost see in my eyes the realization of the description of King David leaping and dancing before God as God was carried in the Ark of the Covenant. And this is a picture that describes King David. And this is a vision that, for me, it was only in a myth, in reading the Bible. But as we were walking there, I sensed this is what I'm seeing. I actually felt that I'm walking and seeing King David dancing before the Ark of Covenant. This is something that was never alive for me. But when I saw these emotions in their face, I could all of a sudden see King David. And this is stuff that people in the right hand, you see how people imagined it. This was not something that they could only dream about it. But once you see the left side, this is reality. So this is why, in many sense, this is a coming back. When you encounter, when you go, it's unclear whether you see the other, whether you see reflections of the memories of our nation. It may sound surprising to identify, and this is going back to stuff that were mentioned earlier, and I want to challenge it in many ways. It may be surprising to identify similarities between monotheistic religion, like Judaism, and the polytheistic Shinto. However, one has to remember that monotheism is never too monolithic, as some would like to think or to imagine. First, as we learned, the kamis are always local. They have the power restricted to their own region. While often we like to think about the Jewish God as the God of the universe, in some part of the Bible, and Menachem just alluded to that, he's also local. His dominion is restricted to the land of Israel, and he cares only about it and its inhabitants. It will be sufficient to mention a single known example from Deuteronomy 32. בהנחל עליון גויים, בהפרידו בני אדם, יצב גבולות עמים למספר בני ישראל, כחלק אדוני עמו, יעקב חבל נחלתו. When the Most High, and this is actually not God, this is not the Jewish God, this is the one who is above God, Elyon, gave the nation their inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the numbers of the son of Israel. For the Lord's portion in his people, Jacob is allotted his inheritance. So Elyon gave Jehovah his part next, which is the land of, which is equivalent to the part of the Jewish nation. So the gods of Israel in the Bible, not in the entire Bible, in some parts of the Bible, is a very local God. And he is the local God of the land of Israel, and he has control over it when he is, and this is what established his relationship with the nation of Israel, and this goes back to what Yagi spoke this morning. But I actually second some, and okay, one would say, oh, this is Bible, this is not Judaism. But later Jewish tradition have angels, among other mythical figures. Now, what's the difference between God and angels? Only God knows, which are in many functional senses similar to the kamis. And I will mention one Amoraic sentence from Genesis Rabbah. I will read first in Hebrew and then in English. אמר רבי סימון, אין לך כל עשב ועשב שאין לו מזל ברקיע, שמכה אותו ואומר לו גדל. Rabbi Simon said, each and every weed has an heavenly angel which strikes him and commands him grow up. So each entity in the world needs his own angel, kami, which actually instruct him, which is in charge of its growth. So maybe it's nice to say that Judaism is monotheistic, but if angels are heavenly entities, this is exactly the same concept. The invitation of the kami to Izumos resembles, and this is where they meet every year, the summons of the prophet Elijah and other angels to attend various traditional events. When we ask the priest in Eastern Shrine whether he senses the attendance of the kamis in their yearly reunion, he answered with a shy smile. In the past, it was sensed. Now, it's only a tradition. I believe that many observant Jews will have answered similarly to such a question about the attendance of Elijahs in their houses in the evening of Passover, or in the act of circumcision, when at the beginning of this ceremony we summon Elijah to join us for the circumcision. These similarities among many other can direct towards various types of discussions. Probably, some would like to ask about possible historical connection between the two religious traditions. Unfortunately, this is the type of questions are impossible to answer. There are, however, phenomenological discussion about the essence of the shared experience that members of the two traditions have, and discussion about the underlying philosophies which are worth pursuing. One of the issues that we had in mind during our endless discussion throughout the 2 weeks in Japan was the tension between universalism and localism, and somehow everyone today mentioned it because this was the main fight, which most of the time we fought about what are the terms of the discussions. It seemed obvious that in its essence, Shinto is local. The kamis are the Japanese deities, and the dominion are Japan's islands. This is true also about the biblical God. Such ideas always provide justification for nationalist movements or even evoke them. However, as we heard from the priest at the Meiji Shrine, the ideas and the morals that are learned from these traditions are always universal. They can be applied to the entire humankind, since they are related to the relationship between the individual person and the nature surrounding him or her. I will turn now to consider specific issues in both religions, the function of pleasing of the God. And I would like to reflect about the philosophical approaches that can be identified in each of them, and to reflect about the significance of this beyond specific practices. As I said, comparison also leads to identifying differences. And in the rest of the paper, I would like to return to the comparison between the Ark of the Covenant and the Mikoshi that I mentioned earlier. So we saw the Mikoshi. Both of them are ways to actually transfer gods from one place to another. God is inside the Ark of the Covenant, or reveal on it, it's unclear. And this is the verse in the Bible, ויאמר אדוני אל משה, דבר אל אהרון אחיך, ואל יבוא בכל עת אל הקודש מבית לפרוכת אל פני הכפורת אשר על אהרון ולא ימות, כי בענן יראה על הכפורת. Tell your brother, the important part is the following. Whenever he chooses into the most holy place behind the curtain, in front of the kaporet on the ark, or else he will die, for I will appear in the cloud over the kaporet. I didn't translate the word kaporet. If you open any Bible, it will be actually translated as the cover of atonement. However, I'm not sure that this is, and here, now I'm a Semitist, now I'm a linguist for 5 minutes. Here I'm not sure that this is the right translation. The root, we have a few Assyriologists here. Actually, Akkadian is complicated here. I wish there were more Arab scholars here. It would work better. The root kaf pei resh, from which the word kaporet comes, means to cover. And we know it from the Bible. V'chafartam, if you take an object and you cover it, you use the word kafarta. The kaporet, its name is kaporet because this is the cover of the Ark of Covenant. And now what I want to actually speak in the next 5 minutes is about this notion of kapara, the notion of, I don't know how we translate it. For many of us, this is a very urgent issue. In 15 days, we will have Yom Kippur, the day of, this is how you translate, maybe the day of cover. So the cover, what we know is that this is known as a Day of Atonement, that we have sins, and this is the time that they will be, now they will be able to be hit kapel, to be what? And that's a good question. My point is, now this is crucial. At the beginning of Leviticus, and this is where we come actually to a comparison with Shintoism, we have the following verses that they say the goal is, at the end, is to sacrifice something, which I'm reading the last few words, an aroma pleasing the Lord. Pleasing the Lord is a notion that it brings us together. But what this thing does, is it will be accepted his behalf to make kapara for him. Now, nowhere here it's written that someone did anything wrong that he needs to have an atonement. There are no sins here. This is a sacrifice that no one sacrificed for sin. It's just something that you give to please the God. And but on the other hand, it's written here that it will be kapara. Now, I will read another verse here, which from Exodus 30. And what this verse tells us is the following. When you take census of the Israelites to count them, each one must pay the Lord a kofar for his life. At the same time, he is counted. Then no plague will come on them when you number them. The word kapara appears as otherwise there will be a plague. In other places, and now I'm coming to the idea that basically how I suggest to read the notion of kapara is basically it is as its basic meaning to cover. And to cover has to do with defense. You basically create a defense. And somehow in English we have this when I say cover me. The point is, basically, if we look in the Bible in many, many places, what it seems to be the case is that in the Word there are different forces. There is this deep fear from the evil that may come and hurt us. This is what happened here. If we don't, once we put the money, the evil element will not hit us. And in Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the main ceremony has this game with two gods, God and Azazel, which is the bad guy, and we have to feed one of them with one sacrifice and the other one with another sacrifice. What God's promised Israel, and this is what you can see here, that if we will feed him, he will take care of the bad guy. And this is the function. When we sacrifice to the God, he is pleased. And once he is pleased, he will take care of not letting the bad things to happen. Now, this is an interesting idea. The interesting idea that sacrifice has the goal to make sure that among the two spirits that we have, the good one and the bad one, well, it's actually not the bad one. Our God, the one, our guy, will make sure that the bad guy will not function. If we will not please him, if we will not do according to what he's expecting, then he will let the evil one loose, and then he will and then he will make bad things in the world. Now it's interesting to compare now to the Shinto. And back to this story about Amaterasu, and again I'm going back to my teacher about Shintoism, which is Irit. The main function of sacrifices is also to please the gods, but it has to do with re-energizing them, reviving them. And this is actually a term that also the priest in Meiji used this week. He used the word revive. Basically, if we think about, I think if you know about stars, so the way we know now about stars is that they have two processes. First they are getting the energy. Once the atoms break, they're shining. And then they moved into stage of death, which is a supernova, and this is how black holes are created. Now, the idea is that this is not a one way in Shintoism. There is an option to stop the declining by feeding the gods that are responsible and re-energizing them. Once we re-energize them, good is happening. The world can actually live to actualize its potential. Otherwise, there will be a declining. Now, this is an interesting comparison. Why we feed the gods? On the one hand, we can feed the gods because there is bad in the world. There are other bad spirits, and we have to make sure that they will not be active. And on the other hand, there is an option that we're just losing our energy, and we need to revive them. We need to re-energize them. Now, this is and this is what actually I meant before. We can take this discussion, even if originally this is not a universalism issue. Even if these two religions, the philosophy behind these two options are the most fundamental questions that basically we are dealing with them right now, these days, in our politics. Whether we have evil, whether we see evil everywhere that we have to block, or whether we see the world as something that may lose its potential. But in general, we want to promote good, and we want to activate and re-energizing and feeding the lines for good things to happen. So I think we can take these two practices and two mythologies that actually form the practices to understand that they actually go to very deep to our questions about what we see in the world and what we are and how we conceive it. So these are the issues that I think only interactions between religions gives us the options of going back deep inside and asking ourselves about our own religions, about the fundamental philosophy that underlying them, and the fact that we actually see those similarities allows us to identify nuances. And this is the great thing that we can achieve from these religious encounters. So I will just conclude with 5 sentences, and before I'm out of time. Thus, while I was walking in the market of Takayama, when we ate at the restaurant in Matsumoto, and obviously when we visited the multiple shrines in Kyoto, I was clearly exposed to a new culture. I learned about the Shinto via first-hand experience. But at the same time, it was not so different from what is familiar for me. Thus, I sense in my ways that this was a mirror that allowed me to leave my own cave and see once again how human beings are similar. Thank you very much.